Good afternoon. It is 12:04, and this is another in the latest series of trainings provided jointly by Western Liberty Network and Parents' Rights in Education. Today, we're going to be talking about building a campaign team, and we have Phil Henderson joining us. We've got Brian Knotts as well. We may have others throughout the day, and for those of you who are watching the recording afterwards, welcome. And so what we're going to do is talk about a couple of things that are available to you through Parents' Rights in Education. I'm going to begin by sharing the screen that I have here. Okay, right now you should see a screen that shows a web page. When you go to Parents' Rights in Education and click on the logon sheet, this is what you will see. And if you don't have a username, you can create one. You can create an account. You can by clicking on the register button, but I'll type mine in really quick to show you how it works. You log in, and for training information off Parents' Rights in Education, you will go to the Training Center. Now, there are various topics that are going to be available. There are two available now: how to effectively testify to your school board. We've gone through those items in previous trainings that are available online. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And how to win your school board election. We'll be diving into those topics today. And if you click on the C course, all of these courses are available to you. Today, we're going to go over building your campaign team. And there's a video that we're going to watch here in a second, and then we're going to go through some material. And then each of these has a quiz. And if you take these quizzes and go through these training sessions, you can be certified as someone who has been trained by Parents' Rights in Education for this particular topic. So we'll go into campaign team. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to start with this video right here.
Welcome to the Parents' Rights and Education Parent Activist Training Center, where we're teaching you the ins and outs of campaigns so you can make the change you want to see. Your campaign team is the driving force behind your cause. It's the group of people who will help achieve your ultimate goals, whether it's promoting a candidate, advancing a cause, or pushing for legislation. The candidate is arguably the most important role, as they're the face of the campaign that the public will come to associate with your mission. You can think of the campaign director as the head coach in charge of the campaign team. They make sure everyone stays on the same page and is getting the job done. Your campaign funds need to be managed, organized, and spent responsibly, which is where a finance director comes into play. A communications director handles your campaign's online presence through social media profiles and websites. All the volunteers offering to support your campaign will be recruited and organized by the volunteer director. An information director will make sure that the candidate is always equipped with the relevant information about the cause, opponents, and other important elements. Candidates can also benefit from having an assistant which manages their schedules and maintains contact with the campaign director. Be sure to check out the additional material on the website to learn more about this topic, take a quiz, and complete the rest of the course to get certified.
Okay, that is the video. Let me make sure that this doesn't launch into another video. Okay. All right, so these are the basic elements. That's an overview of the campaign team. We're going to go over that in a bit here, and I'm going to start with the candidate. As the candidate, obviously, you're at the top of the campaign team, but what you should do as a candidate is limited. For example, the candidate's primary job is to raise money, is to be aware and educated on the issues at hand, and interact with voters. This can happen directly by shaking hands, knocking on doors, but it can also happen indirectly through newspaper interviews, radio interviews, and the like. Those are the three things that candidates should be doing. If a candidate is doing anything other than those three things, then they're not doing those three things. And just about everything else that a candidate might want to do should be done by a campaign staff. Now, if you are running for a high-profile race, like I think Mr. Knotts is, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you're running for the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners, you will need some help. You will need some people to assist with these things. If you're running for a very small race, like a soil and water conservation district race, or if you're running in an unopposed race, you don't need these things as much, or at least as much of these things. But that is the important part of what a candidate should do. You should hire a campaign manager to do everything else, to take just about everything off of your hands except raising money, interacting with voters, and being aware and being able to articulate your position on the issues. Now, the campaign manager, sometimes in large campaigns, these are divided into two sections. You have a campaign strategist, which is or a consultant, who is the architect of your campaign. They develop a campaign plan, and it's based on polling. It's based on a lot of different information. And then you have a campaign manager, and the campaign manager's job is to implement that plan. The candidate, their most important job, other than the three that I mentioned to you, is to hire a campaign manager or a campaign strategist. Once you've done that, all of the other things, the nuts and bolts, the day-to-day work of the campaign should be done by the campaign manager or the campaign strategist. The campaign manager should be the one that hires or fires or brings on other major members of the campaign team. As a candidate, you can, suggest people, let your campaign manager about people that you know, but let those decisions rest with the campaign manager or the campaign strategist. One of the worst things that candidates can do is micromanage their campaign manager. This is tempting because a lot of candidates, they don't like raising money. They don't like doing some of the things that the candidates have to do. And so they like to get involved with other aspects of the campaign, and they have a tendency to micromanage. Don't do that. Focus on interacting with voters, being aware of the issues that you have, and raising money. And by the way, Western Liberty Network does have training facilities available, or training on all of these topics, on how to raise money, on how to do all of the things you need to do, interacting with the media, all the things you have to do. You can go to the training tab of the westernlibertynetwork.org website, and you can get training documents and watch videos, all free of charge. But that's what a campaign manager does. Now, campaign finance director, some people call this the treasurer. It can encompass more than that. Typically, a treasurer will be responsible for managing your checkbook day to day, and also responsible for campaign finance law compliance. Every state and some counties have laws related to campaign finance reporting. You will need to, unless you're running a campaign where you're spending less than $750 all in, you're going to need by law to file a political action committee or a PAC. And when you file a PAC, you're going to need to have a checking account, and you're also going to need to name a treasurer. Under no circumstances should a candidate ever be the treasurer. There are a couple of good reasons for this. First of all, if a candidate is acting as his or her own treasurer, that is a distraction from doing the three things that a candidate should do, which is be informed on the issues, interact with voters, and raise money. You don't want to have anything that distracts you from those three jobs. So that is one reason. Another reason too is because almost inevitably, if you're dealing with a large amount of money, if you're dealing with thousands of dollars, there will be a mistake in the reporting of those campaign finances. It might be that some information is omitted. It might be that there is a mathematical error. An amount was entered in wrong. It could be, it could be anything, generally innocent mistakes. But having a separate treasurer or a finance director will insulate the candidate from charges that they are inept in handling their campaign finances. The last thing you want to do is have a reporter do an investigation about a complaint that is filed by your opponent or one of your opponent's supporters, alleging that you did not handle your campaign finances properly. It is much better to say, oh, there was a mistake made. I have a volunteer or a paid treasurer that is doing this work. They made a mistake and we're correcting that mistake. It's much better to do that than to have the candidate be responsible for it. It makes the candidate look less organized because the candidate doesn't have the organization behind them, which having a finance director would be an indication of. And also, You won't have any charges that, well, the candidate can't handle his own finances. How's he going to handle the finances of the state or the county or whatever position that they are running for? So make sure that you have someone that is responsible for that and willing to take the responsibility of treasurer. One of the downsides of being a treasurer is that the treasurer is personally liable for any fines that are levied because of violations, accidental or intentional, of campaign finance laws. So you're going to need somebody who's willing to, take that responsibility. Sometimes campaigns or candidates indemnify against good faith errors, but that's your decision. That's between yourself and whoever you ask to be your treasurer or your finance director. If you are interested, anyone watching this recording, in being a treasurer, they can be lucrative. People who know Oregon campaign finance laws and know how to work with campaign finances and are able to operate as a competent treasurer, those people are in demand. They can ask for a fee, and they can make some, it's a good side gig on some campaigns. If you want another source of income, get yourself self-trained. Most secretaries of state, I know the Oregon Secretary of State, but other secretaries of state also provide free training on how to handle campaign finances. There are a lot of online resources, and those things are all available to you. So that is another important position. Another one you're going to want is a communication director. Like the finance director, the communication director should be hired by the campaign manager or the strategist. And the communication director is responsible for communicating with other entities. This is the person that if the media has questions, have them contact the communication director. Don't have them contact the candidate directly. Now, sometimes this isn't possible. If there is something that is pressing and there's a 5 o'clock deadline and a reporter needs to talk to you or else you're not going to get covered, sometimes a reporter does need to talk to the candidate. But for day-to-day work things, make sure they call your communication director. Your communication director, operating under the authority of your campaign manager, should be responsible for all things like press releases, marketing campaigns. Sometimes in a larger campaign, you're going to want to hire a marketing firm to work under the supervision of the campaign director, who in turn works under the supervision of the campaign manager. Also, sometimes this job is split up as well, and you'll have somebody who is responsible for social media, maintaining a presence for the campaign on Facebook, Instagram, X, whatever platforms you decide to be involved in addition to your actual home website, which you need to have. But the communication director is responsible for making sure that consistent messaging that is consistent with the campaign plan, adopted, built by the strategist or the manager and approved by the candidate, is disseminated. That is what the communication director does. This can be a volunteer position. This can be a paid position. And then you've got another spot. You've got a volunteer director. You should try to get volunteers to work in your campaign. I tell people, even if they're running an unopposed race, run a campaign, run a full campaign. If you are running an unopposed race, running a full campaign is good for you because you're going to get the experience of having a campaign under your belt. It is also going to be good for anyone who volunteers and works with you because they're going to have the experience of running with a campaign under their belt. And the next time when you get involved with a candidate or ballot measure campaign where there is opposition, you're going to have that experience. Also, you can't fail. If you're running unopposed and you have a campaign team, you can make just about any mistake you want to make and you're not going to lose. There's not going to be a penalty for making a mistake, but you're going to learn from that mistake and it's going to make you better for the next race. But anyway, getting back to volunteer director. A volunteer director is responsible for recruiting volunteers. And of course, the candidate sometimes can help with this because people who do volunteer for a campaign sometimes do want to interact with the candidate. And, the candidate needs to encourage them and thank them and all of this. But the main job of recruiting volunteers, making sure they have what they need, making sure they're deployed, is the responsibility of a volunteer director. A volunteer director will be the one that organizes door knocking campaigns. The volunteer director is the one that will organize advance operations. For example, a display table, if you're going to be speaking in front of a civic organization or a club. The volunteer director is going to be the one that makes sure that everyone at an event has flyers at their seats and those sorts of things. So a volunteer director is responsible for your ground game. And so make sure you have one of those as well. And then you've got an information director. An information director is very useful, as might be implied, for information that you will need if you're going into, for example, a meeting with people that work in agriculture. The information director is going to help make sure you have all the information you need on issues that are relevant to that interview. The information director is going to get you research on things relating to an issue that you're not clear about. You should go in prepared and briefed. If you're going into a candidate debate, you're not always going to know what topics are going to be discussed, but you're going to have a pretty good idea of what those might be. And your campaign manager and you can work with your information director to make sure that you have short 1-2 page briefings on all of the things that are relevant to those issues, in hopes of you don't get caught blindsided. Now, sometimes if you are running in a larger campaign, this is split, and you'll also have someone that's responsible for opposition research. At the level of campaign that I work with, which is generally nonpartisan campaigns, and that I provide training for, I encourage people not to engage in negative campaigns that involve personal attacks. Most of these positions are volunteer positions or low-paid positions. That's not always true with county commissioner campaigns. And you know, I see Phil Henderson here. He was a Deschutes County Commissioner. Brian, you're running for the Multnomah County Commissioner, and it's good to see you, Phil. So you know that these races do sometimes get personal, and they do involve some serious dollars. But generally, I encourage people not to get involved in personal negative campaigns. That said, if your opponent or your opponents have a history on, on various issues with regard to their voting record, or they have done things that are disqualifying, or there are things in their life that make them, unsuitable to hold or run office, if they are legitimate issues, go ahead and use them. And if you want to split up the information director into 2 positions, where you have an information director that informs a candidate about the issues relevant to the race, and you have another person who's responsible for opposition research to find out information that might be compromising for your campaigns, that's certainly fine to do as well. In larger campaigns, for example, when I worked for Dennis Richardson for Secretary of State and some of the others, I always insist, and I wasn't the main consultant in that race. I worked the field game, but typically in those races, I insist on hiring an independent private detective. And I hire that private detective, and the candidate has no say on who that private detective is. And that private detective's job is to do opposition research on the candidate that I'm working for. A couple of reasons for this. Now, in small races, this isn't necessary. But if you're talking about large dollar races, this is always a very good idea. The first reason is because candidates don't always tell you the truth. If there is something compromising in their past, they're sometimes reluctant to share that for very understandable reasons. I remember a friend of mine who ran for U.S. Senate once. She, one time, earlier in her life, had an incident where she was upset with her boyfriend, and she was screaming at him from the boyfriend's driveway, and the police were called. And this situation resolved itself and was forgotten for many years. But later, at a City Club of Portland debate, which was broadcast statewide, this was brought up out of nowhere. The staff had no idea that this had happened, and they were taken by surprise. And the candidate didn't have a very strong answer for this. And so the campaign staff, just acting out of instinct, did the worst thing they could have done. They abandoned the debate and got the candidate out of there. And that became front page story, and that arguably destroyed the U.S. Senate campaign. You don't want your staff to be in that situation. If you have any skeletons in your past, if you have a campaign manager and they hire a private detective to do opposition research on you, it avoids those kinds of situations. This is a very forgiving country. If there has been anything in the past like that doesn't look good, if you are not taken blindside, if you are not surprised by it and you have time, you can develop a good answer for that in case anything comes up. You don't have to bring it up. Sometimes, you might want to get in front of it, sometimes not, but you never want your campaign to be blindsided in a situation like that. Another reason why it is a good idea to investigate your candidate, even if your candidate is pristine, is because if you're running a large dollar race, then you're going to be asking donors, for large checks. And if you're doing that, it will increase their confidence if you can show large donors a written campaign plan, but also assure the donors that this person, we've done, this opposition research, we've hired a private detective, and there is nothing on this candidate that could be compromising. Or you can say, this and that, the other thing happened, but it was 20 years ago and we've got a response for this, and this is what the response is. If you have that, it will add confidence to large donors who might consider writing you a big check. It's like you may trust the candidate, but the donors may not trust the candidate. And if you can tell the donors that, you've done research on the candidate and they're clean, it's going to add to the confidence that they will have when they are considering writing a big check. But again, in most races, it is enough to have an information director that simply provides the candidate with the information they need to be well informed on the issues that they're likely to discuss with voters or discuss with the media or deal with in a campaign or those sorts of things. Information director can also do good opposition research, and you can sometimes split that off into two pieces where you've got a person doing information for the candidate and another one doing opposition research. And these people, again, work for the campaign manager, who is implementing a campaign plan that is written by the manager or the consultant and approved by the candidate. So the candidate gets to approve the campaign manager, they get to approve the plan designed by the campaign manager, and then the candidate should be only responsible for raising money, for being informed on the issues, and interacting directly or indirectly with voters. Everything else should be run by the campaign manager and organized and executed under the supervision of the campaign manager. Sometimes it's good to have a campaign meeting where the campaign manager lets the candidate know what's going on. The candidate should always know what's going on, but it's important to let the candidate or let the campaign manager do their job. Another reason why I stress this a lot, I come back to it, is because candidates generally cannot be objective. I've been a candidate. I know how it is, but I'll give you sort of a clear example. I was working for a candidate one time who gave a speech before a local Rotarian organization. And after the meeting was over, 4 or 5 people came up to the candidate and they liked what the candidate said and, gave them words of support and all of that, and candidate ate it all up. And the candidate afterwards came to me and said, "You know what? I'm not worried anymore. I'm going to win this race." And I said, "That's great. What makes you come to that conclusion?" And he goes, "Every time I speak at a place like this, everyone who comes up to me says they're going to vote for me." And of course, I say, "You know what? I'm glad you're getting that support, but the people who don't agree with you, they didn't stick around. They walked out. Or the people who weren't motivated, they walked out." This is a good example of where a candidate can sometimes get, fooled by their own BS. Not that it's necessarily BS, but it's really hard for candidates to be objective. If you're like me, when you run for office, a little bit of ego gets involved, and you don't want to lose. You see it as a rejection sometimes, and you have this idea that sometimes you're doing better than you are. Sometimes it goes the other way. Sometimes if you make a minor mistake, people think it's a disaster and you're not doing as badly as you think. And that's why we have a campaign manager run the campaign and not the candidate. They say that a lawyer that represents himself in court has a fool for a client. The same is true for a candidate who's trying to run or micromanage their own campaign. Make sure you hire a good campaign manager or a good campaign consultant, and then trust them. Interact with them until you get to the point where you've approved a campaign plan, and then let them do their job. You know, at some point, if they don't do their job or they prove inept, you have to fire them and replace them. If that happens, you know, a campaign that does that is usually in trouble, but it doesn't happen very often. And the way to avoid that is to simply make a good selection in who your campaign manager is. So that is what an information director does. Another good position to have, if you can afford it, or if you have someone willing to do it, is to have a candidate assistant. The candidate assistant is somebody who is with the candidate almost all the time. If there's a briefcase with press folders, the assistant carries it, opens the door for the candidate. The candidate assistant makes sure that the candidate has water, tries to make sure that the candidate is sleeping right, tries to make sure that the candidate is eating right. If they're driving somewhere in the car, the candidate assistant is the one that tries to run interference and takes phone calls for the candidate. The candidate assistant is the one that works with the scheduler. Sometimes the candidate assistant will double as a scheduler. If you have a larger campaign, you're going to want a separate scheduler. And if you have a separate scheduler, you're going to want to use something. If it's a low budget campaign, you can usually get away with something like Google Calendar or Yahoo Calendar or something like that. If you're running a larger campaign, you might want to use a program that's designed for coordinating the people that work in campaigns like Nation Builder or Basecamp or one of those sorts of programs. But a candidate assistant is the one that looks out for the candidate. If you are speaking and you need to get going, but someone's got your elbow and is tugging you away, the candidate assistant is the bad guy. The candidate assistant is the one that says, you know, I'm sorry, you know, Mr. Henderson, Commissioner Henderson, we've got to get going. We've got another meeting in 20 minutes, and they're the bad guy, not you. You know, so if the candidate assistant has their wits about them, they will have a notepad with them at all the time and the pen, and they'll take the phone numbers and names down of people who say they want to contribute or they want to volunteer, or people that you need to know or you need to talk to. It's really important to have that. Now, if you have these folks, you've got a good campaign team. And if they're operating under a written campaign plan, there's a separate training on what the elements of a written campaign plan are. You should have a written campaign plan. I've heard a lot of candidates say, oh, I don't need a written campaign plan. It's all in my head. Don't ever do that. If you do not have a written campaign plan, you do not have a campaign plan. A written campaign plan is like a business plan for a business that's going into a bank for a loan. If you go into a bank for a business loan and you don't have a business plan, they're going to laugh you out of the building. If you're dealing with a large donor or someone with a lot of talent and skill that's thinking about volunteering their time, a campaign plan shows that you're serious and that you have a path to victory, or if not victory, at least achieving the objectives that you have for the campaign. You know, those objectives could be anything from building the party to developing a bank of media contacts and volunteers and donors and whatever it is. But you should have a written campaign plan. It should be designed by your campaign manager, but ultimately approved by the candidate. And if you have a written campaign plan, and when you're talking to donors, it could turn what was going to be a $50 check into a $500 check. If you're dealing with a volunteer, it could turn someone who's willing to give you 3-4 hours a week to someone who's going to give you 10 or 20 hours a week. It really makes an incredible difference. It also provides direction and clarity to the people who are working on your campaign, and lets people know that there is a plan and there is a path to achieving the goals that you want to achieve. But anyway, those are the primary elements of a campaign team. You can get more information by going westernlibertynetwork.org. There is a document you can download that goes into a little bit more detail. And then if you go to the Parents' Rights in Education, I'm going to show you a quiz that they provide. So I'm going to share the screen real quick again. Okay, you should see the screen. This is what we were looking at before. We've gone over many of these things. And when you're done, I think this quiz is probably way too basic for this team, for the people who are on live, but for those who might be recording, if you click on the quiz, let's see, how do I start the quiz? There we go. Start quiz. What is the point of a campaign team? To help me reach my goals, to make people think I'm important, to give volunteers something to do. Well, I don't know. Different people might be motivated by different things, but most of the time it's this one. Go to the next one. Who is in charge of managing campaign funds? Well, as you might guess, it is the finance director. You know, in very, very, very small campaigns, like cemetery control board, campaign manager might do a number of jobs, including this one. But in these sorts of campaigns where you're running for county commissioner, it would be the finance director. How many people do you need on your campaign team? As few as possible, as many as I can hire, as many as I need to reach my goals. I think for efficiency, most people would agree that that is what you need. How does the candidate know what to say? They have to memorize everything. The information director makes sure that they have what they need, or they just make things up as they go. One might wonder, based upon some of the campaigns that you see, but the info director should make sure that they have what they need. Finish quiz. These quizzes are pretty easy, but they make sure that people who are just starting out have the basics that they need, and that they're, you know, oriented in the right direction. So that is how that works. So at this point, I would like to open it up for comments or questions. Phil or Brian, is there anything that you'd like to share? You'll have to unmute your microphone.
Yeah, that's what I was just hunting for that button. No, I think this is helpful. I have a long ways to go, but that's why I started as early as I could. So I have to figure out how to kind of finance these initial steps.
Yep. Well, you should.
Because hiring people is going to be expensive. So.
Yes. What I usually advise to people like yourself is, if you have a spouse, get with your spouse and decide how much you can afford to invest for yourself in this campaign, and then write that check up front. It's helpful when you raise money because you're going to be able to tell donors that I've put X number of dollars in myself. It'll prove that you've got skin in the game, and that sometimes helps to raise money. But you know, what I tell people is, do not stretch yourself too far. Do not create strife in the family. You don't look like the kind of guy who would do that, but some candidates do overreach, and it does cause problems, and you don't want to do that. It's still early enough for the May election where you can do a lot of good fundraising. There is training on westernlibertynetwork.org on how to raise money, how to hold fundraising events and whatnot, but get with your spouse and decide how much you want to spend and put that in up front, into your PAC account after you have found someone who's willing to be your treasurer.
And can I ask you, what's the difference between setting up a PAC account versus a candidate committee?
Well, legally, they're basically the same. To the Secretary of State, they're the same. A candidate committee is a type of PAC. There are a number of different kinds of PACs, but candidate committee is one kind of PAC. And of course, once you form a PAC, you're able to offer the Oregon political tax credit to those who qualify for it.
That's a very good point. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. Has this session been useful to you, Brian?
Yeah, yes, very much so. It's kind of, in a way, scary to think about all the things that I need to do, but it's also helpful in understanding this is a big task, and I just have to be willing to tackle it.
Sure. And if you have other questions, feel free to contact me. You know, if you go to westernlibertynetwork.org, go to contact, I can be reached directly, and I'd be happy to interact with you, as is the case with you, Phil. So do you have any comments? You'll have to mute yourself, Phil.
There you go.
There you go. Yeah.
No, hi, Richard. Good to see you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. Brian, are you getting ready? You say you're running for county commissioner?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I think your breakdown of what the candidate should do and the different jobs descriptions are really good. I think the hardest part is really who do you one to know it's that these are discrete tasks, and that's as a first time I ran a couple of times, and when you first run, you don't really realize how discrete these tasks probably should be, like Richard's saying, like you're saying, Richard. But the more you do it, it does become more clear that they're. But finding people, it's like there's a lack of sophistication in the political world that you don't find in the business world. Like if you set up a business, there's people that do each one of these things, and you can hire them in, and it's kind of like identifiable. In the political world, like the first person you mentioned was just strategist, consultant. Well, some are good and some are bad, and it's
Yeah.
really hard to. And I've watched it on a statewide level in Oregon. We've watched some people that have run several losing big campaigns, and they still talk like they really know what they're doing, and they obviously don't get it.
Yeah.
So that's a hard hire. And then but each one of these are good discrete things, Richard. I appreciate that. And
So is
um,
there a problem, if I could ask you there, um, like with you get somebody for one particular job and they're trying to kind of control another one of the positions? Is that what you're saying?
you asking me or Richard?
Yes, yes, you,
I think he's
Mr.
asking, I
Well,
think he's asking,
I think what you find out is that I don't know if I saw that as I've seen that as much as I've seen you hire them for this job and you realize they really should be doing this job, that
Oh, I
they're
see.
not they're not really as good at what you thought they
Their
were going to
skill
be as
set
they
is,
are. They're really good. Like I've had my last race, I had and it's a smaller county, and so I didn't have all these discrete jobs. And so the person that I called a campaign manager, well, not really. I mean, this is a real common thing. The person you call a campaign manager sometimes is really your campaign assistant. The most valuable thing for you is they're who you talk to every day about what's going on, but so I just identifying and keeping people in roles is hard, I think.
yeah, it can be really tough. One of the things you might want to do, and this varies widely depending on where you are and what the talent pool is locally, but you might want to contact your political party and ask for references, people who you might want to interview that are reasonable campaign managers and strategists, and ask the candidates, what campaigns have they worked on? What were their capacities in those campaigns? Did they win or lose the campaigns? You can
yeah,
also
that's
find out how
important.
much they can also find out how much they were paid. All of the C&E stuff is available on the Secretary of State's ORSTAR system. And if you're interviewing some candidates and they tell you what races they've run on, go look those races up and find out how much they've been paid. That can tell you a lot too. If they won and were paid a lot, they're worth it. If they lost and were paid a lot, not so much. And you can also contact the candidates they worked for and find out what their strengths and weaknesses were as a campaign manager and a strategist. And it is hard to find a really good one. Oregon makes a lot of mistakes, and at large, high-level races, I've noticed in statewide level races, they will hire somebody that's pretty good locally, and they'll win the primary. But then they're sold the idea that they need to hire a consultant from out of state to come in and run the general election. And most of them lose because they don't understand the state. They should have stuck with the one that brought them, right? They should have stuck with the one they had in the primary. And they get fancy. They think, oh, we're in the big leagues now. You need a big league consultant. And a lot of times the big league consultant, you're a second tier priority to them. And, they're not as good as they think they are, or they're good in a particular environment, which isn't necessarily your environment. But if for the races you're working, that you're thinking about running, you're going to be dealing with somebody locally or somebody, at least in the state. And so there are a lot of things you can do to make sure you don't hire a lemon. So.
Sure, I have a question about that. Because it looks like you identify as 6 or 7 different roles. So you start, and so you're a candidate, and there's 6 or 7 roles you need to fill, and there's all these people or that you can find or whatever. which one do you start with? What, or how do you, I mean, it seems like you start with the top down, but I'm not sure that's true. I don't know.
Well, what I would do is I would start by focusing on two spots, the treasurer and the campaign manager or strategist if it's a larger campaign. I would start with those. Now, if you know people who would be suitable for other positions, if I was sitting down with my campaign manager or campaign strategist, I would say, okay, Mr. or Ms. Campaign Strategist, I know these people who I think might be good candidates for these spots. I would like you to consider them and tell them why. But let them make the decision. Sometimes consultants come in with a team they've worked with for years and they know what they're doing. When I work on campaigns, that is what I typically do. I have a person that I work with on media. I have a person that I work with, on social media. I have a person that does printing. I have these kind of things, and I like to bring in this team because we've worked on a number of races together. So go ahead and recommend people that you think would be good, but let your campaign strategist or campaign manager make the decision. If you've hired a good campaign manager or a good campaign strategist, you will be able to trust them. If you cannot trust them, you hired the wrong person. Also, the treasurer, you want to keep a watch on that, and hire that person in conjunction with your campaign manager or strategist. There are exceptions, like if there's somebody is gold. Like there's a woman up in Clatsop County whose name was Lori Piercy.
Yeah.
Phil knows who she is.
Yeah, I used her.
She worked with me on every significant campaign that I ever worked on, never made a mistake. And I would just not approve a campaign plan from my manager that didn't include Lori Piercy as the treasurer. And so sometimes there are situations like that. But remember, you as the candidate are responsible for hiring your campaign manager or strategist. They are responsible for writing your campaign, which will include staffing. You must approve that campaign plan. So if you've approved the manager and you've approved the campaign plan, you've approved the campaign. Now leave your manager alone to do their job and focus on raising money, interacting with voters, and being informed on the issues that you have. Meet with the campaign manager frequently, let them know what's going on. You're also going to want to meet with other members of the campaign team, not to monitor or supervise or manage them, but to thank them and to let them know that you know who they are and that you appreciate the work that they are doing. And of course, this is especially important for people who are working for free. We've got a whole training on how to manage volunteers on the training tab of westernlibertynetwork.org. I encourage you to look at those resources. They're all available to you. And of course, we're going to have our annual conference on February 3rd in Portland. You can go to the website and check that out. We're going to have 20 breakout sessions organized along 4 tracks, and at least half of them are going to be relevant to what you were trying to do. Phil, are you thinking about getting back in the game?
Well, is this a public forum here that we're on that?
Well, it could be viewed by anyone. It will be posted. So you don't have
I've been involved in some races and I'm not active in the, I stepped down as chair of the Republican Party after 2 years. I'm just kind of looking around at what there's, we still have needs in Oregon for good leaders. And I'm just kind of thinking about how to fit in right now. So.
Sure. Okay. Well, great. Right now I'm serving.
I'll talk privately, maybe.
That's fine. I understand. That's fine. Right now I'm on the Oregon Ethics Commission. And so they were silly enough to post me to that. And before that, I was on the Tualatin Valley Water District Board, where I served. Yeah. I was elected 5 terms. And so that was.
So the Ethics Commission, is that that's just a statewide thing that deals with statewide positions, or? Yes,
it's not an elected position. You're nominated by either the governor or one of the legislative caucuses, and then you're confirmed by the Senate and voted on, and then the governor appoints you. And once you're on the ethics commission, you deal with things like, it's a quasi judicial position where you deal with like conflicts of interest, apparent conflicts of interest, abuse of executive session, and those sorts of things.
So I imagine you've been busy lately.
Very busy. Yes,
Yeah.
very busy. I chaired
With
that.
the OLCC and yeah.
But you know, I really enjoy that position because it's one of the few positions that operates like it's supposed to. You know, there are a bunch of Democrats and there are a bunch of Republicans, and then there's me, you know, and I'm a registered libertarian. But if you sit there and listen to a meeting, you can't tell who's affiliated with what party. They really, you know, I've seen Democrats and Republicans go after people in their own party and defend people in the other party. And it's really a pleasure to work on that commission because it works the way it's supposed to. And but that's not relevant to this story or to this topic. So let me ask, are there any other questions before we call it a day?
Not for me. I'll probably think of some later, but you know, like you said, I can get a hold of you by other means. So.
Yeah, anytime. You, Phil?
Real informative. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, God bless you both. And for those who are watching this recording, God bless you too. And we'll be back next week with another training. Take care.
Great. Thanks, Richard.